The radio crackled with static as Avery Rogers pressed herself against the blood-soaked rocks, her HK-416 empty and her extraction team 3 hours overdue. Operative down, mission compromised, the voice reported back to Naval Special Warfare Command. No signs of life at coordinates, presumed KIA. 29 years old, dark blonde hair matted with mud and blood, she listened to her own death being reported while enemy forces celebrated what they thought was the elimination of the American infiltrator who'd been causing them problems for weeks. What they didn't know, what her own command didn't know, was that Avery Rogers had survived worse than a mountainside ambush and a 30-foot fall into a ravine. They thought leaving her for dead would end the mission. Instead, it had just eliminated the only thing holding her back: orders to minimize casualties and avoid unnecessary engagement. Now, with her official death providing perfect cover and her training as one of only 12 female SEALs giving her capabilities they couldn't imagine, she was about to turn their celebration into the last mistake they would ever make. Staff Sergeant Avery Rogers had been operating behind enemy lines for 3 weeks, conducting reconnaissance on a terrorist cell that intelligence indicated was planning a major attack on American interests. Her mission was simple: gather information, identify key targets, and report back for a larger operation that would neutralize the threat. But intelligence had been wrong about the simplicity of the mission. The terrorist cell wasn't just planning an attack. They were coordinating with multiple organizations across the region, creating a network that posed a far greater threat than anyone had anticipated, and they had detected her presence far sooner than her handlers had believed possible. The ambush came at dawn on her 21st day in the field. Avery was conducting surveillance from a concealed position overlooking the terrorist compound when she spotted movement that didn't match the routine she'd been monitoring for weeks. Too many armed figures moving with too much purpose, all converging on routes that would surround her position. Her training kicked in immediately. She activated her emergency beacon, grabbed her essential gear, and began moving toward her primary extraction point using evasion routes she'd memorized during mission planning. But they had anticipated her escape routes. The first sniper's bullet missed her by inches, striking the rock where her head had been a split second earlier. Avery rolled into cover, her HK-416 ready, and began the kind of running firefight that separated special operations training from theoretical knowledge. She was outnumbered at least 20-1, in terrain the enemy knew better than she did, with limited ammunition and no immediate backup. The tactical situation was what military planners called unsurvivable. Avery had survived worse. She used every technique that had been drilled into her during SEAL training: fire and movement, use of terrain, sound discipline, and the ability to think tactically while under extreme stress. For 2 hours, she fought a running battle through mountain terrain that would have challenged an entire squad of Marines. Her radio crackled with updates from her extraction team. Nightfall 7, this is Overwatch. Extraction delayed due to hostile air activity. Hold position and maintain concealment. Overwatch, Nightfall 7, I'm in active engagement with approximately 20 hostiles. Cannot maintain position. Moving to alternate extraction point. Nightfall 7, negative on alternate extraction. Area is compromised. Hold position. Avery found herself in the impossible situation that every special operator dreaded, caught between enemy forces and friendly forces who couldn't reach her, with orders that didn't match the tactical reality on the ground. She made the decision that defined the rest of her mission. She would complete her objectives independently, using whatever methods were necessary to survive and accomplish the mission. The running firefight continued through the afternoon, with Avery using superior training and tactical knowledge to stay ahead of forces that had significant numerical and terrain advantages. Her HK-416 performed flawlessly, allowing her to engage targets at ranges that kept her enemies cautious while she maneuvered toward terrain that would give her options. But ammunition was finite, and the enemy forces seemed inexhaustible. As the sun began to set, Avery found herself on a ridge overlooking a valley that contained both the terrorist compound and her alternate extraction point. Between her and safety were approximately 30 armed fighters who had spread out to cover every possible approach route. Her radio crackled. Nightfall 7, Overwatch, we've got hostile surface-to-air missile activity in your area. Cannot provide air support or extraction until threats are neutralized. Overwatch, how long before missile threats are neutralized? Minimum 12 hours, possibly longer. Can you maintain position overnight? Avery assessed her tactical situation, limited ammunition, surrounded by hostile forces, no extraction possible, and intelligence objectives still incomplete. Standard operating procedure would be to find a concealed position and wait for extraction while avoiding contact. But standard operating procedures didn't account for what she'd discovered during 3 weeks of reconnaissance. The terrorist cell she'd been monitoring wasn't just planning a single attack. They were coordinating a series of simultaneous strikes that would occur in less than 48 hours. If she waited for extraction, if she followed standard procedures, thousands of innocent people would die. Overwatch Nightfall 7. Mission parameters have changed. Request permission to complete intelligence gathering objectives before extraction. Negative Nightfall 7. Your primary objective is survival and extraction. Intelligence gathering is secondary. Avery looked down at the compound where terrorists were finalizing plans that would result in mass casualties. Then, at her HK-416 with its remaining ammunition. Then, at the terrain that would allow her to approach the compound under cover of darkness. Overwatch, I'm experiencing radio difficulties. Switching to backup frequency for communications check. She switched to an unused frequency, effectively cutting communications with her handlers, and began planning an infiltration that would either complete her mission objectives or get her killed in the attempt. What happened next would redefine how Naval Special Warfare Command understood the capabilities of their most classified operatives. Avery spent 2 hours conducting reconnaissance of the compound's defenses, guard patterns, and structural vulnerabilities. The facility was more heavily defended than intelligence had indicated, multiple guard posts, overlapping fields of fire, and what appeared to be professional security procedures. But it wasn't designed to defend against a single operative using advanced infiltration techniques. At 0200 hours, during the period when human alertness naturally decreased, Avery began her approach. She moved through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate in daylight, using night vision equipment and sound discipline to avoid detection. The compound's outer perimeter was a fence topped with razor wire and monitored by guards and towers. Getting inside would require neutralizing sentries without alerting the rest of the security force, a task that demanded perfect timing and flawless execution. Avery identified a guard tower that was positioned to monitor a section of fence that other towers couldn't observe. The guard was following a predictable pattern, scanning different sectors on a timed rotation that created a 45-second window where his attention was directed away from her approach route. She waited for the optimal moment, then moved across open ground with the silent efficiency that had been drilled into her during SEAL training. The guard never knew she was there until her knife ended his participation in the terrorist operation. Inside the compound, Avery faced a more complex challenge. She needed to locate and photograph intelligence materials while avoiding approximately 40 armed fighters who were conducting their own security procedures. She moved through the facility using a combination of stealth, timing, and intimate knowledge of human behavior patterns she'd gained during weeks of observation. Guards expected threats from outside the compound, not from someone who had already infiltrated their secure area. Avery located the command center where terrorist leaders were finalizing their attack plans. Through windows, she could see maps, communications equipment, and what appeared to be detailed operational schedules. Getting inside would require eliminating the guards without alerting the rest of the compound, a task that pushed her tactical skills to their absolute limits. She approached the building using shadows and blind spots in the compound's lighting, then waited for the guard rotation that would give her access to the command center. The first guard was eliminated silently, professionally, using techniques that left no immediate evidence of hostile activity. The second guard was more challenging, positioned where other guards might notice his absence, requiring Avery to use his body to maintain the appearance of normal security procedures. Inside the command center, she found intelligence that made her blood run cold. The terrorist attacks scheduled for the next day weren't limited to a single target or even a single country. The cell was coordinating simultaneous strikes on civilian targets across 3 continents: airports, shopping centers, schools, and government buildings. The scope of the planned casualties was beyond anything intelligence had anticipated. Avery photographed everything: attack plans, target lists, communications protocols, personnel rosters, and weapons caches. The intelligence would allow counterterrorism forces to prevent every single planned attack. But her infiltration had been detected. As she finished photographing the intelligence materials, the compound's alarm system activated. Someone had discovered evidence of her infiltration, and within minutes, every fighter in the facility would be searching for the intruder. Avery had 2 choices: attempt to escape with the intelligence, or complete the mission by ensuring the terrorist cell couldn't execute their plans even if she didn't survive to deliver the intelligence. She made the decision that would define her understanding of what it meant to be a special operator. Instead of trying to escape, she would eliminate the terrorist cell's operational capacity. Avery moved through the compound with the efficiency of someone who had studied its layout for weeks and understood exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Her targets were the communications equipment that allowed coordination with other cells, the weapons caches that supplied their operations, and the leadership that planned the attacks. She planted explosive charges in the communications center, the weapons storage facility, and the vehicle maintenance area where bomb-making materials were kept. Then she began systematically eliminating the terrorist leadership using precision shooting and close-quarters combat techniques. Her HK-416 was perfectly suited for the kind of indoor combat she faced: accurate, reliable, with sound suppression that allowed her to eliminate targets without immediately alerting every fighter in the compound. But ammunition was limited, and there were still 38 armed fighters searching for her. Avery used the compound's own layout against its defenders, moving through areas she'd memorized during surveillance, using their confusion and alarm systems to mask her movement and eliminate targets who were searching for an intruder they couldn't locate. She fought with the clinical precision that came from years of training, but also with the desperate efficiency that came from knowing that failure meant thousands of innocent people would die in terrorist attacks that could have been prevented. One by one, the terrorist leadership was eliminated. One by one, their operational capabilities were destroyed. One by one, the compound's defensive positions were neutralized by someone who fought like a ghost and struck like death itself. But the odds were still overwhelming. As Avery eliminated her 15th target, the compound's remaining fighters began coordinating their search more effectively. They established overlapping fields of fire, sealed off potential escape routes, and began systematically clearing buildings where the intruder might be hiding. Avery found herself trapped in the compound's main building, with approximately 25 armed fighters converging on her position. Her ammunition was running low, her explosive charges were set but not yet activated, and the intelligence she'd gathered would die with her if she didn't find a way to transmit it before being overwhelmed. She activated her emergency beacon and began transmitting the intelligence photographs using burst communication techniques that would get the information to her handlers even if she didn't survive to explain what she'd discovered. Then she activated the explosive charges. The communication center exploded first, cutting off the terrorist cell's ability to coordinate with other organizations. The weapons storage facility detonated seconds later, eliminating their operational supplies. The vehicle maintenance area erupted in flames that would prevent any escape attempts. The explosions created confusion and panic among the remaining fighters, giving Avery the distraction she needed to fight her way toward the compound's perimeter. But her movement was detected by a sniper positioned in one of the remaining guard towers. The bullet struck her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her HK-416 flying out of reach. She rolled into cover as more shots impacted around her position, then began crawling toward the perimeter fence, using terrain features to avoid the sniper's field of fire. Behind her, the compound was burning and secondary explosions from the weapons cache were destroying whatever operational capacity the terrorist cell might have retained. Ahead of her was 30 meters of open ground that she would have to cross while wounded, without her primary weapon and under fire from multiple positions. Avery made it 20 meters before a second bullet caught her in the leg, sending her sprawling into a drainage ditch that provided minimal cover from the increasing volume of fire being directed at her position. She activated her emergency beacon one final time and transmitted a message that she hoped would reach her handlers. Mission objectives complete. Intelligence transmitted. Cell neutralized. Tell my family I completed the mission. Then she began crawling toward the fence, expecting each moment to be her last. The sniper's next shot missed by inches, striking the ground beside her head and showering her with rock fragments. But something had changed in the compound behind her. The volume of fire was decreasing, and she could hear shouting that sounded like confusion rather than tactical coordination. Avery reached the fence and used her remaining strength to cut through the razor wire, using tools from her survival kit. Behind her, the terrorist compound was burning, its leadership eliminated, its operations disrupted, and its coordination with other cells permanently severed. She crawled through the fence and into the rocky terrain beyond, then began moving away from the compound, using navigation techniques that would take her toward terrain where extraction might be possible. But she was losing blood, her strength was fading, and hostile forces were still pursuing her. 2 hours later, as dawn broke over the mountains, Avery found herself in a ravine, approximately 2 kilometers from the compound. She could hear helicopters in the distance, either search and rescue from her own forces or enemy reinforcements arriving to assess the damage to the terrorist facility. Her radio was damaged, her emergency beacon's battery was dying, and her wounds were serious enough that she was losing consciousness intermittently. The helicopters passed overhead without stopping. Avery Rogers officially died at 0647 hours when her emergency beacon stopped transmitting. Her handlers reported her death to Naval Special Warfare Command with the notation, "Operative completed intelligence gathering objectives before being eliminated by hostile forces. Intelligence indicates terrorist cell has been significantly disrupted." What they didn't know was that the disruption had been total, that the intelligence was comprehensive enough to prevent multiple simultaneous attacks, and that Avery Rogers was still alive in a mountain ravine, planning her next move. 3 days later, as Avery regained consciousness in the cave where she'd crawled to escape detection, she could hear radio chatter from the compound, indicating that terrorist reinforcements were attempting to reconstitute the cell's operations. Her official death had been reported, her mission was complete, and any reasonable person would focus on survival and evasion until extraction became possible. But Avery Rogers had never been reasonable, and the intelligence she'd gathered indicated that the terrorist network extended far beyond the single cell she'd already eliminated. She spent the next week conducting surveillance from concealed positions, treating her wounds with supplies from her survival kit, and identifying the terrorists who were attempting to rebuild their operational capacity. They thought they were safe because the American operative was dead. That assumption was about to become fatal. Avery's wounds had healed enough for tactical movement, and her surveillance had identified the locations where terrorist leaders were attempting to coordinate with other cells. Her official death meant she could operate without restrictions, without concern for political implications, without orders that prioritized diplomatic considerations over mission effectiveness. She was going to complete the mission that had officially ended with her death. The terrorist reinforcements had established a temporary command post in a building complex approximately 5 kilometers from the original compound. Intelligence indicated they were attempting to contact other cells, reorganize their attack plans, and continue operations despite the loss of their primary facility. Avery spent 2 days conducting reconnaissance, learning their routines, identifying their security measures, and planning an infiltration that would permanently end their operational capacity. But this time, she wasn't just gathering intelligence or conducting limited strikes. This time, she was going to eliminate every single person involved in planning attacks on innocent civilians. On her 8th day of officially being dead, Avery Rogers began the most lethal operation of her career. She approached the terrorist command post using techniques that had been refined by a week of living in hostile territory, moving like a ghost through terrain that provided multiple approach routes but limited escape options. The building complex was defended by approximately 15 armed fighters who were focused more on communication activities than security procedures. They felt secure because they believed the American threat had been eliminated. Avery entered the complex through a building that appeared to house supply operations, then moved systematically through the facility, eliminating guards and support personnel with weapons she'd taken from the original compound. Her approach was methodical, professional, and absolutely ruthless. Every person in the facility was involved in planning or supporting attacks on civilian targets. Every person eliminated was preventing future casualties among innocent people. Every tactical decision was made with the understanding that mercy toward terrorists meant death for their intended victims. She reached the command center where terrorist leaders were conducting a video conference with other cells, coordinating new attack plans to replace the operations that had been disrupted by her previous mission. Through the partially open door, she could hear discussions about targets, timing, and methods that would maximize civilian casualties. Avery entered the room with weapons ready and eliminated every person present before they could react to her appearance. But the video conference was still active, and terrorist leaders in other locations had witnessed the elimination of their coordinating cell. She found herself looking at computer screens, showing figures in multiple locations who were now fully aware that their network was being systematically destroyed by someone they had believed to be dead. Instead of trying to escape, Avery used the active communication links to gather intelligence about the entire terrorist network. She documented the faces, locations, and operational plans of terrorist leaders across the region, then transmitted this information using the terrorists' own communication systems. Finally, she delivered a message directly to the terrorist leaders who were watching. This is what happens to people who target innocent civilians. Your network is compromised, your operations are terminated, and your personnel will be eliminated. Consider this your only warning. Then, she destroyed the communication systems and began fighting her way out of the building complex. But instead of attempting to escape, she continued hunting. Over the next 4 days, Avery Rogers systematically eliminated every terrorist safe house, weapons cache, and support facility she had identified during her extended reconnaissance. She operated with the efficiency of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to accomplish. Her official death meant she could use whatever methods were necessary without concern for political ramifications or diplomatic complications. Her training meant she could operate independently in hostile territory for extended periods. Her motivation meant she would continue fighting until every threat to innocent civilians was eliminated. By the end of the week, the terrorist network that intelligence had estimated would require months of coordinated international action to disrupt had been completely destroyed by a single operative who was officially dead. Avery Rogers had become the ghost that haunted terrorist nightmares, the specter that eliminated threats they thought were safely hidden, the legend that proved death had no power over someone who refused to stop fighting. When she finally activated her emergency beacon 2 weeks after her official death, the response from Naval Special Warfare Command was unlike anything in military history. Nightfall 7, this is Overwatch. We're showing your beacon signal, but our records indicate your KIA. Please confirm your identity. Overwatch, Nightfall 7, mission objectives complete. Request extraction and debriefing. I have significant intelligence about terrorist networks that require immediate action. The silence on the radio lasted 30 seconds before the response. Nightfall 7, confirm you are alive and mission capable. Affirmative, Overwatch, very much alive, mission complete, and ready to come home. The extraction team that reached her position 12 hours later found Avery Rogers sitting calmly beside a cache of terrorist weapons and intelligence materials, looking like someone who had just completed a routine assignment rather than someone who had single-handedly destroyed an entire terrorist network after being officially declared dead. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Kane, the extraction team leader, approached her with an expression that mixed relief, amazement, and professional respect. "Rogers, according to our records, you've been dead for 2 weeks. According to intelligence reports, the terrorist network in this region has been completely eliminated. Want to explain what happened?" Avery stood up, shouldering the equipment she'd recovered from terrorist facilities. "Chief, they left me for dead, so I figured I'd return the favor. Mission complete, all objectives achieved, terrorist network neutralized." Kane looked at the intelligence materials she'd gathered, then at the distant smoke columns from destroyed terrorist facilities, then back at the operative who had officially died 2 weeks ago. "Rogers, what you did here, this is beyond special operations. This is something else entirely." Avery smiled, the first smile she'd managed in 3 weeks. "Chief, sometimes being dead is the perfect cover for completing impossible missions." The debriefing at Naval Special Warfare Command lasted 3 days and involved more senior officers than Avery had ever seen in one room. They reviewed her intelligence gathering, her tactical decisions, her independent operations, and the complete elimination of a terrorist network that had been planning coordinated attacks on civilian targets. Admiral Catherine Morrison, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, asked the question that defined the significance of what Avery had accomplished. "Rogers, you were officially declared KIA, your mission was considered complete, and you had no orders to continue operations. Why did you continue fighting?" Avery thought about the intelligence she'd gathered, the attack plans she'd discovered, the innocent people who would have died if she'd followed standard procedures. "Ma'am, the mission wasn't complete until the threat was eliminated. Being declared dead just gave me the operational freedom to finish what I'd started." Admiral Morrison nodded slowly. "Rogers, what you accomplished in 2 weeks of independent operations would normally require months of coordinated international action, involving multiple agencies and significant resources. You did it alone, while wounded, using captured equipment and pure tactical skill." "Ma'am, I had excellent training and significant motivation. You also demonstrated something that's going to change how we think about special operations. Rogers, you proved that sometimes the most effective operative is the one the enemy thinks is dead." But the implications of Avery's operation extended far beyond tactical innovation. Her success had demonstrated capabilities that intelligence agencies worldwide were scrambling to understand and replicate. 3 weeks later, Avery found herself in a secure facility that didn't appear on any government maps, briefing officials whose names were classified at presidential levels about the psychological and tactical advantages of posthumous operations, missions conducted by operatives whose official deaths provided perfect cover for activities that couldn't be officially acknowledged. "The enemy's greatest weakness," Avery explained to the assembled intelligence leaders, "is their assumption that death ends operational capacity. When they believe they've eliminated a threat, they relax security, reveal hidden assets, and expose vulnerabilities they would never show to a living operative." General Patricia Hayes, now director of a Joint Special Operations Program, asked the critical question, "Rogers, can this approach be systematized? Can we train other operatives to function effectively after being declared KIA?" Avery considered the question carefully. "Ma'am, it requires a specific psychological profile, someone who can operate independently for extended periods, make tactical decisions without guidance, and maintain operational focus despite being cut off from all support systems. Not every operative has those characteristics. But some do. Yes, ma'am. And those operatives could be invaluable for missions where conventional approaches have failed and political considerations prevent official action." Admiral Morrison leaned forward. "Rogers, what you're describing is a new class of special operations, ghost missions conducted by phantom operatives who can achieve objectives that are impossible for officially acknowledged personnel." "Exactly, ma'am. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the newest technology or the largest force. Sometimes it's the warrior everyone thinks is dead, operating with perfect freedom because the enemy believes the threat has been eliminated. The program that emerged from those discussions was classified beyond the highest levels of government security. Operatives would be selected based on psychological profiles that indicated exceptional independence, tactical creativity, and the ability to function effectively under extreme isolation. They would be deployed on missions where failure meant official denial and success meant unofficial gratitude from nations that could never acknowledge their actions. Avery Rogers became the program's first instructor, teaching selected operatives how to survive their own deaths and continue fighting when everyone else had given up hope. Her students learned to operate in the space between life and death, between official acknowledgement and absolute deniability, between conventional warfare and something that transcended traditional military doctrine. They learned that sometimes the most effective way to complete impossible missions was to officially fail at them first. Years later, when intelligence analysts tried to understand how certain terrorist networks had simply vanished, how specific threats had been eliminated without any official military action, how problems that seemed unsolvable had quietly disappeared, they would find no records, no acknowledgments, no explanations. They would find only the faint traces of operations that had never officially occurred, conducted by personnel who had never officially existed, achieving results that could never be officially confirmed. But in the deepest archives of agencies whose names were never spoken publicly, there would be a single file marked with classifications that required presidential authorization to access. Inside that file, a brief notation. Sometimes the most lethal operative is the one everyone thinks is dead. Avery Rogers had been left for dead in enemy territory. She'd returned as something far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined, proof that legends never really die. They just learn to fight without being seen. The enemy had celebrated her death. History would remember their celebration as the last mistake they ever made. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this one.